So I know what a tremendous sports fan you are. Is anytime I ask you about the NFL or basketball, like you get, I don't
Basketball so
watch it.
much. Baseball a little bit more. Even then, I don't know.
I still think it's the same that you see in football. You follow college
Yeah.
ball though, still.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So, but anyway, and I know how big of a soccer fan you are. So, do you know what's going down in Brazil in 2027?
Because I have access to the outline, yes.
I
No,
cannot even believe
otherwise, I woulda had no idea.
I cannot believe you didn't know the Women's World Cup. I mean, it's the like we don't well, we used to dominate. We don't dominate so much anymore, but like our women are good.
Yes, I remember the '95 team and the Got Milk ads and all that stuff. I
I think that was
remember that.
91, by the way. No, it was 95, you're right, 'cause
It was '95,
no, it was
because my sister was way into
99.
the Got Milk.
It was 99.
Was it? Was that the one where Brandy
Yeah,
Chastain
that was
scores the
99.
goal in the
Yeah,
shootout and everything? That
yeah,
was '99?
yeah.
Rough. That was
It was awesome.
close.
It was so awesome. Oh my god, I loved it so much. So, hopefully we can bring back the World Cup for us in 2027. It's been a little bit of a drought for us.
I'll take your word for it.
I know oh my god, it's so disappointing, so disappointing.
It's a soccer
Do you
thing,
even
not a
know
women's
that
sports thing.
the men's World Cup is happening?
Absolutely not, I had no
Oh
idea.
my god.
None.
I don't even know what to
Kickball.
tell you.
Glorified kickball. Come at me.
You shut your mouth. So anyway, all this and just thinking about the World Cup because I really do wanna go to this one in Brazil. Like, I've never been to one, a Women's World Cup, and I really wanna go, and this one's actually somewhat kinda sorta local. So,
Sorta.
I'm sorta local. Hey, it's closer. I'm gonna try
Closer.
to get tickets. But anyway, it got me thinking about Brazil, and then when I started thinking about Brazil, it made me think about Argentina because they don't like each other,
Mhm.
and then Argentina got me thinking about the Falkland Islands, and that was what my master's thesis was on. But then I started thinking about military coups. This is how my brain works. Like, I can't
Yeah.
just focus
Like,
on one
connect the
idea.
dots, it's like
Yeah,
1 to
it's just
1
the
to
way
1,
it
yeah.
goes. And then I'm like, "Oh my god, military coups in Latin America." It's like the dynastic cycle in China. It just
You went
over
there.
and
That's
over.
like the convergence of your
My
spheres.
2 favorite passions, I know. It's like
Yeah.
over and over and over and over again. And do you know how many coups there were in Latin America in the 20th century?
No, how many?
There are 111.
What? Are you serious?
Oh, yeah, 111.
Wow. That's insane.
Which nation do you think
I'm
had
gonna
the
go out on a limb and say that that number is too big.
You think?
Try not to.
Yeah. Which nation do you think had the most?
Ooh, I would think, like, Chile or maybe Argentina.
How about
I
Bolivia?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I've got some
I think
lore
they
I
have
don't
something
think
like
we have.
14.
We have a brief aside, we can do this. So when I was in Latin America, and South America in 2005, I was in
I actually had no idea
Peru.
you were in South America.
Yeah, yeah, I went down just to bum around, spend all my money and then come back
Oh,
to
good
the
for you.
United States and
Yeah,
start my life.
yeah.
But I was down in, like, Peru, Southern Peru on Lake Titicaca, and the plan was to go to Bolivia. And this would have been, like, June 2005,
Okay.
and when I got over the border, there was, like, this military, like, uprising. I don't know if it would qualify as a coup,
As a
but it was
coup.
definitely, like, this destabilized state of affairs in Bolivia, and the government wasn't letting, travelers or foreigners in. So we're at the train station trying to figure out how to get into the country. Are we going back
Mhm.
to Peru? Like, of course, like when you're 22 years old, like, there's no consequences in life.
Yeah,
And
you're
so I'm
stupid,
there,
yeah.
talking to some like Australian, I think, folks. And they're like, oh, we're going to try to get in. So they like hoist up their backpacks, go into the station. And then they came out like, some minutes later, less than an hour later, and they didn't have their bags or anything anymore. They were like visibly shook and like, what's going on? And like, yeah, we got robbed in the train,
Yeah.
like, inside of the train station. There's no police, there's, like, it's not a safe situation at all, at which point, got back on the train and went back to Peru. Because
So
it's like,
I'm
"Okay,
so
this is
proud of you
real."
for actually thinking of that
Yeah.
moment.
But then, like, later on, like, the city we went down to in southern Peru, there was, like, curfew at night, and like, military police came in on these big, like, 2.5-ton trucks, like those World War II trucks that you'd see, and, like, like, soldiers would spill out into the street, and, like,
See,
people
it
would, like,
spreads.
run into, like, their houses and stuff like that. It was definitely a different world for sure.
Oh my god, and it just was so common in Latin America, especially in the latter half of the 20th century. I mean, there were some, but, like, 45 on it's ridiculous. Where do you think in my humble opinion, the worst coup happened? What country?
I don't know. Your humble opinion?
In my humble opinion. I think
Let's
actually I don't even think it's my humble opinion, I think it's generally accepted.
if we're going with coups, we gotta go to Chile.
It is Chile. It is
Yeah.
absolutely Pinochet. And for our listeners, this story is gonna be a little bit intense because the abuses that took place as a result of Pinochet seizing power in a coup, it's horrific. Like, when I first was studying this in my master's degree, I'm like, "There is no way this happened." Right? And then you start doing more and more and more research, and you're like, "Oh my god, not only did this happen, it was worse."
All right, I
It's
think we gotta
crazy.
do it. We're 5 minutes in, we gotta start the
Alright, let's
show
go.
officially. You ready? Hi,
Yep.
welcome to Storytime with the Histories, the podcast where we dive headfirst into the past and occasionally belly flop for dramatic effect. We're your hosts, Jen Dumas and Matt Bornine, teachers, part-time historians, and full-time sarcasm enthusiasts. In our series, we'll dust off the drama of dead empires, resurrect ridiculous revolts, and explore the moments that make you go, wait, that actually happened? Which I
Mhm.
know you're excited to have that
So
moment
excited.
with everybody. This is a part in the show where we hit up the sources, but, today you're our source. This is your
Yeah,
baby. This is your
this
whole
is
thing from your, educational past, from your academic toils, from the content minds of your brain springs forth today's outline, script, all of it. This is all you.
yeah, and I'm gonna, like, uh, just caveat in front, I am not a published author. I don't have a PhD. I don't have any of that, but this is what I studied in my master's program, and so this is like 2 years of notes all coming together, and then
Do you have
making
a
sure I had to.
bibliography from this? Should we post your bibliography?
You could, but then I
Yeah,
had to go back because it was so long ago, 20 some odd years ago, I had to make sure the information still stood true, which it did, so that's good. So anyway,
nice.
so let's get into this. So we have to before we can even begin to talk about Pinochet and Chile, we have to talk about Guatemala, okay? And for those of you who don't know, God, I know our students are gonna be like, "Where's Guatemala?" In Central America, it kind of became the epicenter of Monroe Doctrine and really Cold War tensions in around, like, the early '50s, like 1954. There was a liberationist movement that was forming there. It's gonna challenge US, hegemony, which basically means, I don't know, leadership, dominance of a country over another,
Dominance, I think
region
would
over
be fair,
another,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and because, that's what the United States has established with the Monroe Doctrine and with the Roosevelt Corollary, okay? Latin America is our backyard. Our backyard. We own it. That's kind of what comes across.
And this
And so
builds
there.
on what we talked about last week,
Yeah.
right? With regards to not just those doctrines, Monroe and Roosevelt corollary, but kind of like Roosevelt doctrine,
Yeah.
because that was the military interventionist impulse. But now we also have to layer in, we're in the Cold War in 1954, the Truman Doctrine too, right?
Got right.
Right, and you were just telling me right before we hopped on that you've been going back through preparing some materials for class, and you
Mhm.
were reading, the Long Telegram and that sort of stuff. So why don't you hit us real quick with, just a quick reminder of what the Truman Doctrine was?
So the Truman Doctrine comes about, oh, I don't know, 47, and it's this idea that to stop the spread of communism or to contain it, because that was the U.S. Cold War policy, that the United States would provide economic and military aid to any country who was resisting communist agitation, who was resisting communist subversive forces in any country. The US would just dole out that economic aid for the economy, military aid for the military, and in order to stop the spread. And this originally happened with Turkey and Greece, and it was successful in Turkey and Greece. And so then it just became a major policy throughout the Cold War for the United States.
Yeah, and it would be fair to say that the United States during especially the 1950s saw communism everywhere, right?
Everywhere. Anything.
You if it was a developing country, a recently decolonized country, or a country going through decolonization, I'm thinking
Mhm.
Africa here specifically,
Yeah.
anywhere where you saw these liberationist politics, even if they were democratic in nature, even if they were brought about internally by the impulses of the people
Mhm.
living in those countries, the United States saw the nefarious hand of Moscow reaching out, pulling the levers of power, and
Mhm.
really trying to create communism in these little bubbles all over the world. And in particular, the United States was very concerned about communism in Latin America. But this really wasn't the case, was it?
No, it's and I think I was just what you said is that I don't think the United States government at that time could reconcile that democracy and elements of socialism could coexist, economic socialism. I just don't think for whatever reason, they thought it could coexist. And for a lot of these Latin American countries, due to obviously early stage colonialism in the 15 to 1700s, and then being economically dependent on Western nations who were forcing them to become a cash crop export based economy, life wasn't great for a lot of people. Like this was not um, a long term solution that would really help elevate all the masses within Latin American countries. And so what ends up happening in Guatemala, is there's a coup. Okay, like I said, there's coups everywhere, right? And this really stems
100 plus.
yeah, I know, right? This really stems from the issue of the United Fruit Company, which I mean, the United Fruit Company.
I'm Chiquita Banana. Well, now they are Chiquita Banana, but that
Yeah.
was before.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's where it came from, right?
yeah.
So the United Fruit Company sets up shop in Guatemala, bananas, like the origins of the banana republics, and the United Fruit Company had a very close relationship, with. Oh, they can't see my air quotes. With with Guatemalan President Jorge Ubico, and basically they worked together and forced landless Mayans to work as unpaid laborers for the United
Man,
Fruit Company.
it's like, this is way back, like, Spanish style, sort
Oh,
of, like,
yeah. It's like
would
meter
it be
system
fair to
style.
say this is like slavery, basically?
Well, yeah, because
Like, kinda like the repartimiento?
yeah, it's very similar.
Okay,
And this idea that they're unpaid laborers, and the labor was their tax, basically.
right.
We're not gonna
Alright, so this
collect
is very
taxes.
repartimiento,
Yeah.
mitad system
Yeah,
sorta
it's a meter
stuff.
system, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
okay.
interesting." And And the president went along with it because the president's gonna economically benefit from the United Fruit Company. This is like a little
That's
bribery.
euphemistic for bribes, yeah,
I
I
know,
was just
I
gonna
know.
say,
I said
you're
bribery,
saying
I said.
bribes, yeah.
Okay. And, and it's terrible because it goes completely against what America said was its values at the time. I mean, it has nothing to do with, freedom of anything, but again, it gets ignored because Ubiko wasn't communist or socialist leaning in any way, shape, or form. But the problem is you sell your soul kind of, and I don't want to say the United States is the devil, but you sell your soul to make an economic profit and you're hurting your people in the process. And this is what's going to lead to this coup. He's going to be ousted by an actual pro democracy uprising. Actually inspired by the American New Deal.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess that kinda makes sense though, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
the New Deal reining in laissez-faire policies,
Yeah.
providing for people who are downtrodden. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And so, the people vote in this guy named Juan Jose Arevalo, and he was a university philosophy professor. He'd been living in Argentina in exile because obviously this is a guy who didn't like Ubico or his policies, but he's legally voted in as leader of the country. Okay. And he is not as overt with the socialist policies as his next in command will be, who is Jacobo Arbenz Guzman. He was elected president as well, democratically elected. Okay, these are
Huh?
not rigged elections.
We
Okay,
talked about this
which
before,
is
like
also
the
common in Latin
paradox.
America, but these are
Yeah,
not rigged. And so he gets elected as well. He wants to carry on Arevalo's reforms, but he also brings in 2 words that the United States hates at the time, land redistribution, because the United States associates land redistribution with communism, which is not true, but that's how they associated it,
makes
right?
sense. Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense that we make that association, but especially when you look at, like, Mao in China, for
Oh, yeah, yeah,
example, right?
totally,
Like, land reform was a huge element of that first five-year plan.
that's
Was
tot
that first
and
five-year plan.
Stalin to an extent, but in a different
Yeah,
way.
well, yeah, I
So
mean, maybe in Ukraine, right, with the kulaks and that sort of
oh, yeah,
thing.
that would be oh god, see, god, the 20th century just sucks.
Not good, not
No,
good.
not good. Not good. So you were, looking at the book Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, and what did you find out there with this whole thing?
Yeah, so he basically broke down just what this land reform looked like and
Mhm.
some of the economic plans that had been put in place to try to, uh, reform Guatemala in a way that would enable the riches of the country, the economic exports, etc., to stay in country and not go to the United Fruit Company or
Mhm.
any other foreign landholders who are just really exploiting the system. So Gonzalez said, and I'm quoting here from Harvest of Empire, Arbenz swept to victory in the 51 elections and vowed to take Araveo's peaceful revolution a step further by redistributing all idle lands to the peasants. Araveo knew that in a country with no industry to speak of, with more than 70% of the population illiterate, and with 80% barely eking out survival in the countryside, ownership and control of land was Guatemala's fundamental economic issue. The country's soil was immensely fertile, but only 2% of the landholders owned 72% of the arable land, and only a tiny part of their holdings was under cultivation. End quote.
And
So
this
basically, yeah,
yeah, it's
like this
common in
is the
this
United
is what
Fruit Company.
happened. And
Mhm.
this is even and I it was definitely made worse, but this actually begins after Latin American revolutions in the 1830s. Like, this is a continuation, but at a much, much, much worse and intense level, is that the people of Guatemala, okay, were not benefiting from the very resources that come from Guatemalan soil. The beneficiaries were foreign companies who were coming in, using that soil to produce these cash crops, and then these foreign companies would sell these cash crops everywhere and make a ton of money off it. That money did not stay in country. This is why there's 80% basically poverty, and there's 70%, what do we say, 70% illiteracy rate, right?
Mhm.
That money should have been going to the Guatemalan people to improve the building of their industry and to improve their infrastructure and to improve their education and their healthcare for the Guatemalan people, and it simply was not. So Arbenz comes in and says, "This money is gonna start going to the Guatemalan people."
Makes
That's what
sense,
he
and I think there's probably people out there thinking to themselves like, "Yeah, but we've talked about corruption and we've talked about, inefficient governmental systems, etcetera," and that
Mhm.
was certainly true of this time period, but I do think even though we would have to jump ahead on the timeline to see that these sorts of actions would take place, but after the revolution led by Castro in Cuba
Oh, yeah.
in the late 1950s, that's exactly what happened, right? The land was taken from the mafiosos and from American corporations, and the wealth of Cuba stopped heading towards Florida and started staying in island. And one of the immediate turnarounds was the explosion of educational infrastructure and the healthcare system in Cuba, which up through COVID had been one of the crown jewels of publicly funded and operated healthcare on planet Earth. So while corruption definitely
Totally
exists
screwed, yes, without a doubt.
in Latin America, exists everywhere. But to say that, oh, just because, the state would have taken the land, I think it would be, um, overly simplistic and overly determined to say, "Oh, this money would have just flown immediately to the hands of the, elite and not to the people of Guatemala."
Yeah, and I kind of like I totally 100% agree with you, and I just because I think everybody looks at Stalin communism as that is communism, and it really wasn't. It was totalitarianism.
Yeah.
There was no equality in any of it. So, but that's what people equate with communism, and so that's what they think happens because that is what Stalin did. Like I mean, he did. But when Khrushchev comes out and says, "Yeah, Stalin screwed up the entire country," right? Okay, and recognizes that wasn't really communism, but again, that's what people see in their mind. They think that's going to happen in every single state that has any kind of communist or socialist element, and it's not necessarily true. So anyway, yeah, Arbenz comes in 1952. The Guatemalan Congress also passed the Decree 900, which basically orders that all property that was over 600 acres and not in cultivation, so not in cultivation, were going to be confiscated and it was going to be given to the landless poor. Okay.
Nice. Sounds
So
like
they're
a good
not
move to me.
this is not like there's going, "Hey, all these United Fruit Company banana plantations that are under cultivation, we're taking it all and you're screwed." This was land that was not under cultivation, that was over 600 acres, so they're not taking land from small farmers or anything else. It was just gonna be given back to the people so they can make a frickin' living.
And I think importantly, Decree 900 also put into place a, way for the landowners who lost that land to be compensated for their loss,
Yeah,
which
monetarily
is a
compensated.
pretty nice deal considering that many of these, companies nationals came in and just gained access to this land through theft. Now the country who's taking this money, this land, excuse me, and giving it over to farmers because the land is not being cultivated, they're going to also receive money back, right? It was a pretty hefty number of people, landowners who were going to avoid the loss of land, and only a small number who are actually going to lose land. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's something like 345,000, 350,000 actual landowners in Guatemala, but this only applied to 1,700. So there were only 1,700 landowners who owned more than 600 acres. So this did not affect everybody in Guatemala. It affects the big businesses. That's what happens.
I'm guessing one big business in
Yeah, one
particular.
very big business, right? So, without a doubt, United Fruit Company lost a ton of land because it was uncultivated. It was just sitting there. But they were offered 1.2 million in compensation.
That's pretty good.
That's
I
pretty
bet
good,
you
right?
adjusting for inflation and stuff like that's gotta be close to like
Yeah,
$25 million
it's
today.
not that the Guatemalan government just threw out the 1.2 million, some random number. They actually went back and they looked at the UFCO tax accounts that were declared to the Guatemalan government, which obviously were not 100% accurate based on what kind of money, United Fruit Company was
Yeah.
making. But they used the tax account, said, "We'll give you 1.2 million for this land." United Fruit Company's like, "No!" And backed by the US State Department, they demand 16 million. And that's not gonna
What?
happen.
$16 million? There's a small discrepancy in these numbers.
Just a little bit, right?
Jeez.
And so, no, they're gonna get their 1.2 million, okay, which is a decent amount. Obviously not a lot for United Fruit Company because they are, a multi-million-dollar company, but that's what was gonna happen. So and then Arbenz is like, "Here's your 1.2, we're taking the land, moving on." There was no moving on with this, not from the
No,
United States perspective, right?
definitely not.
So when the United Fruit Company demands 16 million, Arbenz is like, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So then what happens is Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles convinced our
Boo,
president, I know,
boo,
right,
boo. Those guys,
that Arbenz
more
had to
horrible
go.
people.
Yeah. Arbenz had to go because he wouldn't pay the $16 million.
And the Dulleses aren't even like neutral arbiters here. Weren't they
No,
both like
not even
on the
close.
board or heavily invested in United Fruit?
Yes,
Of course.
of course.
So this is like using the American foreign policy apparatus to
Yeah,
line your own pockets
that's exactly what this
and
was.
and justifying it using the Truman Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary, I'm going to assume, which again, like provides the impetus for military power to be exercised if statecraft doesn't work.
Yeah, but this would have nothing to do with that because this is not that this Guatemala wasn't paying back its debt it owed to foreign countries.
No, this is a shakedown. This is like a mafioso
Yes.
shakedown.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so because basically what happened is the Dulles were part of the law firm that represented United Fruit Company, and, God, on their advice, Eisenhower authorized the CIA to organize this Operation Success, and it's a planned overthrow of Arbenz. So we are going to overthrow a democratically elected leader in a foreign country
Dude,
because our
look,
feelings got
look.
hurt, and we didn't make 16 million, we only get to make 1.2 after the millions upon millions that were exploited from this land for years.
I like that they called their shot though. None of this is good. This is horrible.
It's
This makes me
horrible.
feel really like gross and this is really smarmy. And the overt nature of this is like so much like more like EU slimy than like the stuff we saw in Italy. But there is something about calling your Operation
Yeah, I mean,
Success before it even
the
starts that
confidence, right?
like there's some chutzpah there.
Don't people
Ugh.
like confidence? Isn't confidence like one of the sexiest things on the face of the planet? So there you go.
Ugh. Great.
I know, right? So the U the CIA backs this Guatemalan colonel named Carlos Castillo Armas with an assassination list. That's lovely.
Yeah, which I was reading, like,
A
this is the
kill
first
list.
time that a kill list had been created, by the CIA. There had been coups in Iran before this. There had, like you had pointed out previously, Turkey, Greece. The kill list is something that we haven't seen before. This is a new wrinkle,
And it won't be the
to
last
American,
time.
let's call it state craft. I don't know what to
Statecraft, I
call
like
this.
that.
Yeah, statecraft.
So
Gross.
I know it's disgusting. Along with this assassination list, they provided financial support, they provided training, weapons. Okay, it's basically like build your own military for a coup.
Yeah, this is like what we saw in Italy with Gladio.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then to make it even better, the US provided air support for the invasion coming from neighboring Nicaragua. So now we're going to use another Latin American country to launch attack against another one to get rid of a democratically elected leader.
And so just to make this sure I got this all in place,
Okay.
the people of Guatemala elect a leader
Mhm.
to enact social programs, economic programs that are going to lead them out of poverty towards education, better healthcare outcomes, etc. The United States does not want this because ostensibly land reform is communism.
That's how they
And
view it.
right, and because the American business interests in region are also threatened, a very Monroe Doctrine thing,
Mhm.
the United States green lights a coup, which they're basically funding and making possible to remove a democratically elected leader, put into place, going to assume a puppet, and they're gonna do this, like, overtly. This is it's not gonna be like a secret coup,
Yeah,
it's
this is
not gonna
not subtle.
be this is gonna be
Yeah.
loud, so to speak, like what
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy would say, like a loud sort of thing.
Yeah. That we
Great.
an American business, a huge American business that had a lot of political influence was gonna get crushed through this and that wasn't gonna happen. That's really what it comes down to.
And I assume this coup was successful.
Yes. Well, here's what happens. Um, with records released under the Freedom of Information Act, you know what that is. A list compiled in 1949 of known or suspected communists or so-called top flight communists, okay, um, are basically told eliminate immediately. Now, we're talking suspected, and we don't even know that they're suspected because again, anything that wasn't capitalist or democracy, anything with even a socialist leaning was automatically labeled communist. And so this basically get rid of all these top flight communists with an anti-communist coup. That's what it
And
was.
then
So it gives the game away. Really, this does give the game away because it makes it really clear that this was less about protecting property rights, okay, which were suspect to begin with, right, because of how
right.
they obtained the land, right, and more about thwarting communism, okay, and this idea of American business won't be trifled with. This is the Roosevelt corollary in action, only instead of going into Latin American countries because they're not paying back their debts, they're going into Latin American countries because it's threatening the wealth of United States businesses. And to some degree, the United States fear the spread of communism.
Man, and I guess that makes a lot of sense because, control over Latin America during the Cold War, that's a twofer in terms
Mhm.
of shoring up your borders, shoring up your resource access, shoring up your markets, all those sorts of things, and it's a way of making sure that communism or socialism doesn't spread into your quote unquote "backyard," where these concerns, to be fair to the Americans was something that was, I know, on the mind of Khrushchev, for example, after the failed Bay of Pigs, and
Mhm.
Khrushchev and Kennedy have a summit in 1960. There's this real strong push from Khrushchev to get the United States missiles, those Jupiter missiles that have been deployed
Got it.
into
Yeah.
Turkey, out
Yep.
of region, and
Mhm.
this eventually provides the pretext for Russian Soviet missiles in Cuba and leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there was some very clear gamesmanship going on here
Yeah.
with regards to the Soviet Union moving in, but all of that occurred after the United States had shouldered Castro because of land reform efforts, like we said
Mhm.
before, in Cuba,
Yeah.
and created a natural bridge for Soviet communism and Soviet influence to come into the Western Hemisphere overall. So while there's this whole fear of communism in the Western Hemisphere, like some of this is like the creation of the United States. And then, the United States turns around and pours gasoline on this fire, so to speak, because President Kennedy in 1961 introduces the Alliance for Progress,
Yeah.
which was a U.S. economic aid and educational improvement and infrastructure development program operated through the IMF and the World Bank. This is kind of like one of those, like, I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts sort of
Yeah,
moments,
right.
right? The United States says, like, hey, we're going to build up all this sort of stuff. And I guess before the all of these things, the Alliance of Progress, et cetera, are
Mhm.
promising are the same things that these leaders in Latin America are trying to do for themselves. They're trying to wrest control of their resources, their sovereignty from foreign influence so that they can develop themselves economically, so that they can improve educational and healthcare outcomes, so that they can develop their own infrastructure. All of these things would happen on their own, or at least could be allowed to happen on their
Right,
own.
allow yeah.
And then even like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I the Alliance for Progress investment was a pittance compared to the Marshall Plan investment in Western Europe
Yes,
after World
much, much
War
smaller.
II,
Much,
right?
much
Like
smaller,
that,
yeah.
like we're talking like 1/20th the amount
Yeah,
of
it was
investment in Latin
and
America. Like, so this
certainly
wasn't even gonna like, this is more like a way of getting the hooks back into Latin America. Is that a
well,
fair
yeah,
assessment?
because Latin American countries a lot of Latin American countries weren't developed to the I mean, after the war, it's a little bit different with Europe, but they certainly didn't have the infrastructure that Europe had prior to World War II, and so it was gonna take even a lot more fundage to be able to make sure the access to education and healthcare and infrastructure was gonna catch up with the rest of the world. Certainly more than the United States was gonna be willing to invest. Because this was gonna be a long drawn out process, and there were gonna be setbacks, and there were gonna be failures, but anyway, it's just another form of containment. That's what we know it is.
That's insane. All right, so we've got this set up. Many Latin American states they're going to take this U.S. help, right?
Mhm,
They're going to take them up on the offer. Some countries, though, are going to pivot more towards socialist leadership, even with the coup in Guatemala, the
mhm,
rejection of communism in Cuba. There
mhm.
will still be socialist candidates, people who rise up, and in one country in particular, there's a pretty successful movement, right? And that country is
Chile.
Chile.
Yeah, so there's a in 1970, there's an election for president. There is a Marxist candidate. I mean, and he says Marxist candidate Salvador Allende, and he was actually holding his own against his other counterparts. There was Jorge Alessandri of the PN or the National Party. This was a more right leaning party, and then there was Christian Democrat candidate Radimiro Tomic. And not as successful. But anyway, Allende receives about one third of all the votes. And that's the most of any candidate in that election. But the problem is, it was less than the 50% that was needed to win the presidency outright. And in this case, in Chile, the National Congress was going to have to then vote on which of the top two candidates would become the next leader of Chile, either Allende or Alessandri. And that's just the way it goes. That's the way it's always worked. And in the past, the top vote getter was selected to be president, but the Cold War is going to mess with this a little bit, as it always will, right? It should have been lockstep that Allende was made president.
Right, but this is, like you said, this falls under Cold War politics. I know Nixon, Richard Nixon, who's in his first term, and this is kind of pre-détente, but kind of
Mhm,
playing around with some of the détente sort of stuff, still was very interested in containing the spread of communism and took an active role in trying to thwart Allende's ascension and
mhm,
utilize the CIA to unleash what was called at that time black propaganda, like these really false rumors. Something like 700 articles of broadcasts, all anti Allende, were published
mhm.
and sent out to the people. In one instance, I was reading in Vincent Bevan's Jakarta Method that one of these pieces of propaganda was like was played like 20 times a day on the national radio, was a loud burst of machine gun fire and then a woman screaming, "The communists killed my kids."
Oh
And
my
that's it. That
god.
was like that was the piece of propaganda. And all of this, like, propaganda encouraged, other countries to put economic pressure on Chile to also try to prevent Allende from coming to power, most notably Brazil in this moment, and started to lay a possible groundwork for military intervention and coup if Allende did indeed come to power.
Yeah, because you need the help of the other foreign nations or local nations who are close there to be able to launch your plan from. Um, and so And remember how we talked about at the beginning that there were 111 military coups in the 20th century, Bolivia was the top with 14, and then Chile is without a doubt the one of the worst we've ever seen,
How
okay?
could I forget?
I know, right? So and the reason that there has to be a coup is because Allende gets the presidency. Even with all of that CIA propaganda, even with pressure from outside Latin American nations, Allende gets the presidency, and he's gonna bring in socialist policies. He's made it very, very clear. He wants the land of Chile to benefit the Chilean people, and he lasts all of 3 years.
Yeah. Now, I did read before we move on,
Mhm,
I did read that right after 1970, right after Allende comes to power,
mhm,
ascends to power, that there was an attempt by the United States to force the head general, the leader
mhm.
of Chile, to enact a coup. The official policy of the United States had been essentially if there wasn't like a mandate from the people, like a strong impulse to back a coup, that the United States shouldn't enact a coup. Kermit Roosevelt, who helped lead the coup in Iran against Mossadegh, refused to lead that coup that we talked about in Guatemala because the margins were too tight.
Yeah, it
Arbenz
wasn't
was
worth it,
was
yeah.
too popular. But here, like you said, this was a down to the wire election with really thin margins, and there was this thought that hey, a coup could be possible. And the leader of Chile, his name was Rene Schneider,
Mhm.
was tapped to essentially lead this coup, but Schneider's doctrine, if you will, within Chile was that of being a constitutionalist. And he said, well, this process of throwing the election to the Congress and having Congress decided this is all fair, this is
Yep,
in
fair
line with
game.
our
Yep.
constitutional mechanisms. And so, in
Excuse
order
me, doc.
to foment some of that coup energy, the CIA created a plan to kidnap Schneider. Do you know about this?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Schneider was gonna be kidnapped, but the CIA operatives botched the kidnapping. They ended up just killing Schneider in his
Oh, yeah.
home
Yeah.
and left the body there and then turned around and were like, "Hey, let's just blame this on the communists. Let's set the stage so that this looks like the communists are essentially doing like a Stalin purge of all of the existing power structures and figures," even though Schneider very much was not a communist, he was a
No.
constitutionalist.
Yeah.
And this idea was then meant to like kind of activate those right-leaning members that had of the society that had lost out. This is
Yeah,
very
Alessandro said, yeah.
strategy of tension,
Oh, yeah,
that we
totally.
talked about before.
This is and again, we saw this America do it in Africa. We've done this like, this is nothing
Yeah,
new.
Lumumba, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I joke that Allende only made it 3 years, but I'm actually pretty impressed that he even made it 3 years, right? Because, I mean, again, he labeled himself a Marxist. We knew that he was gonna do socialist policies. He called it the La Via Chilena al Socialismo, which is basically the Chilean way to socialism. I mean, that's pretty clear. And he's like, "We're gonna nationalize all the major industries, especially their copper mines, because they had amazing copper mines." He wanted to do aggressive land reform and redistribute larger estates to landless peasants. He wanted to expand social welfare programs. Now, these are very common goals for most Latin American countries, right? This is not abnormal. But to fund all these programs, you're gonna need a lot of money. And you're gonna need money from an industry that is really, really, really valuable. And for Chile, it would be the copper industry. They'd have to nationalize it. And you have to understand at this time, okay, the copper industries were controlled by corporations, American corporations in Chile. And for those of you who don't know what nationalization means, you want to enlighten them?
Yeah, nationalization is basically when ownership of a private corporation or industry is transferred to the state or put under governmental control. This is a means for basically making sure that all of the profits that are generated in said industry stay in house and don't go out to like shareholders or whomever might reap the rewards. In this case, American corporations.
Yeah. So like, the American corporations, Anaconda and Kennecott, when these businesses will be nationalized, planned nationalization from Allende, they weren't going to get much of the profit anymore. Most of those profits were going to go to the Chilean government, and the Chilean government was going to use it to fund the Chilean way to socialism. Can't imagine they were thrilled with that.
No, no, definitely not. So we have the stage set. We've got Allende enacting his, to be fair, Marxist policies, his socialist policies,
Mhm.
trying to build up the wealth of Chile, one of the poorest countries in Latin
Yeah.
America. And he's going to be going up against the juggernaut that is the United States, who has been running coups across Latin America, deeply engaged in Vietnam, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, as you pointed out in the episode. The United States has been getting its fingers into all of the guts of the world, pulling out whatever it wants. And this feels like a really good place for us to call it an
They
episode
called an
and set
episode.
things up for next week when we're going to actually get into the
The
coup
actual
itself.
coup and what happens as a result of it, which is absolutely horrific, yeah.
Oh, man.
Pinochet.
Well, okay, first of all, we did it again. A whole episode of just context, just like in Italy.
I know,
But you know
but
what?
there's so you have to do it.
You can't avoid it. You can't
Y
avoid it.
you can't I can't just say the United States helped put Pinochet in power without any context, like, why would yeah, you have to have the background as to why this guy is gonna come to power any eh,
You don't wanna
it's
do
just
like the Schoolhouse Rock, like, "I'm just a dictator." That
you
doesn't
know,
rhyme, but you know
we
what
could
I'm
totally make
saying?
one like
Yeah.
that. Well, if
I
you
know,
took
I'm
the
sure.
tater out, it'd be really easy.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, man. So,
So next
alright,
week, we
well,
are gonna cover the coup and, Pinochet's horrible abuses while in power.
and you're gonna have to go all the way back to your gold star warning, the one you gave at the top of the
I know, I have to
episode.
restate that because there was nothing bad yet in this one, nothing, like,
Well, I mean, there
I
was
mean,
nothing
bad,
gruesome.
not
Just like,
gruesome, right?
3,000 people on a kill
Oh
list
god, don't
and
oh god, it's so awful.
assassinations and all,
But this is
all the
again, this
horrible
is
sort of
why and I
stuff.
don't wanna go too much into it, but this is what I'm talking about is the why we have so much instability in Latin America even today because they never got a chance to develop on their own, and I'm not saying that all these American nations would have come out in these beautiful socialist systems that would have provided for the people because there are clear instances where they tried to do it and corruption got in its ugly little way, right? But to not even get
Sure.
the opportunity.
You're right, right. I mean, I think, like, the only country we can look at from this time period and say, like, "Huh, I wonder if things would have worked out for them," and then through extension, everybody else would be Cuba, right? Like, a country that has its own revolution, who goes through this process, who is able to repel the United States because of a variety of factors. But, I think pretty obviously the extension of the Soviet nuclear umbrella over
Totally.
Cuba helped really maintain the revolution there. But, like, had Cuba been able to engage on the world stage, not been embargoed, etcetera, who knows? What can be said is that within Cuba, there were things that lead you to believe that there could have been successful outcomes. And if you're not in a Cold War setting or footing, maybe you don't have some of the repressive jailing elements of the Cuban regime. Maybe you don't have some of the elements that I think people can rightly point to with Cuba during that time period and say, like, hey, like, this is not exactly a free country. But, like,
Right.
as we are seeing, like, I think it's pretty obvious there wasn't a free country in Latin America in large part because of this intertwining of doctrines that
Yep.
we have previously discussed.
Agreed. All right, so
All
that's
right.
gonna do it for us tonight. Matt, where can our listeners tell other people to listen to this
Look,
podcast?
so the first thing, we haven't asked for it in a while, but we do, like, hey, if you want to hook us up with a rate and review on, Apple, Spotify, that just really helps people find the podcast. We are also now on YouTube. You can find us at The Historyist. We'll have a link for that in the show notes. So if you are interested in a podcast experience through YouTube, you can do it there. And, just comment for the algorithm, just something simple, or just throw us a nice, short, simple review. We always appreciate that. But otherwise, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. We're out there wide.
All right. So everybody, thanks again for listening. Until next time, see you later.
Bye.